Welcome to BoardCast, questions answered, challenges explored, the podcast where questions lead the way and conversations connect school leaders to real-world solutions.
In each episode, we'll dive into the issues shaping Arkansas schools today, answering the questions that matter most to board members and administrators. With expert guests and meaningful discussions, we provide a snapshot of challenges, best practices, and strategies to help you lead with confidence. Let's explore today's challenges and uncover tomorrow's answers together.
Welcome back to ASBA BoardCast. In today's episode, we're going back to the basics of school facilities. Every district in Arkansas is responsible for maintaining buildings that are safe, warm, and dry. But what does that really mean? How does partnership funding work? When do you need an architect? And how can boards avoid costly compliance mistakes? This episode walks through those foundational concepts in a practical way for board members and superintendents. Joining us is Jeff Lisenbey, ASBA Executive Board member and past president, who also serves as president of the Sheridan School Board and has 27 years of board experience. In addition to his board service, Jeff brings professional experience in roofing, giving him a unique perspective on facilities projects. We're also joined by Aliza Jones, a facility planning coordinator who works with 30 school districts across Arkansas. Aliza began her career as part of the statewide facilities assessment and later helped launch the Division of Public School Academic Facilities. She's one of only 4 accredited learning environment planners in Arkansas and works with districts on master planning, partnership funding, and school safety. If you're looking for a clear overview of how facilities planning works in Arkansas, this conversation is a great place to start. Let's dive in.
Hi, good morning, guys. Yes, I have been working in school facilities since 2003 when I was part of the legislative task force. I was then one of the founding members for the Division of Facilities when it was created in '05. And in 2007, I began working independently as a school facility consultant for districts around the state. My territory is all over. I go all the way to Highland, to Des Arc, all the way up to Omaha and Gravette. I am an accredited licensed educational planner through San Diego State. I also have completed all of the required LEARNS Act to be a school safety coordinator for school districts. So I've been working with my school districts for just over 21, almost 22 years, in either the capacity of the state or as a facilities consultant.
So that kind of leads us into our topics today. We're going to talk about facilities. And my first question for Lisa is, we hear a lot about terms. And so the first question is, what is a warm, safe, and dry project?
So a warm, safe, and dry project is kind of the umbrella for things that we would call building systems. So your roofs, your electrical, plumbing, high vac, which is your heating and cooling, and life safety systems. So that kind of anything that would keep the students warm, safe, and dry, obviously. So when districts are looking at partnership projects, does it mean new construction or is it system replacements?
Okay. Let me ask this question because we hear a lot in legislative sessions and school districts obviously work on a limited budget, so it's hard to find funds for these. So how do we get funding or how do we get help from the state partnership funding for this type of project or for a new construction project?
So school districts are able to apply for partnership projects on the even year with funding that's appropriated on the odd year. And it's a continuing cycle, right? So if you're looking at, there's some terms that are always floated around with the legislators, and those are adequacy, equitability, and suitability. So adequacy means that you have a facility that is able to offer the spaces that are needed for the curriculum so that you have I'm old school, but let's say you have family and consumer science course, right, as part of the curriculum. Well, do you have a family and consumer science room? Do you have science laboratories? Do you have special ed rooms? So that is looking at the adequacy. Do you have the right spaces? Equitability means, and that came down from the Supreme Court verdict, which was Lakeview versus Huckabee. Equitability means that every child in the state of Arkansas is afforded the same rights to education, regardless of their poverty level, regardless of their demographics. So kids in Marble, Arkansas should be afforded the same equitable education that kids in Bentonville or Fayetteville, Arkansas are afforded. Suitability means, do you have enough square footage for the number of projected enrollment that you have coming down in the next 10 years? So if you're doing a new construction, what a district or a consultant working with that district has to do is look at what the existing square footage is and what the projected enrollment is for that school. And then you kind of balance that out with what's called a program of requirements. And that will tell me, do I have too much square footage or do I not have enough? If I don't have enough square footage, then you have a qualifiable project that the state will partner with. If you have too much square footage, then you need to look at how you're utilizing your existing square footage. Warm, safe, and dry projects, it used to be that we would look at condition of the buildings and condition and ages of those systems. Now we're having to justify replacing a roof with how many work orders are being submitted over a 3 to 5 year period on that roof. And I totally get that. It's kind of like you can't say I have a bad roof and not have the work orders to justify it. There was probably in the past 2, 3 years, a number of districts that had projects that were denied because of lack of justification. So we're really pushing school districts now, use that Operation Hero, the computerized maintenance program, to document when you're having problems with your systems. And so a lot of people, when it comes to roofs, Jeff, you'll know this, a lot of people will hire companies to come out and do roof assessments. And those are great to have as additional information, but you still have to have the work orders to document having that done. And once you put in your application, if it's approved, the funding is done on, again, an equitable basis, trying to make a dollar no matter where you are. So they look at the district's facilities wealth index. And from what I'm understanding, there's a couple of wealth indexes. And so a district wealth index may be different than a facilities wealth index. And so if your facilities wealth index is a state share of 62%, then that means the state will kick in 62 cents on that dollar towards that project at the qualified cost.
Okay. So I guess a question, since every district has to maintain their buildings, and so the warm, safe, and dry projects are, they're going to be every district, even a district that's not growing, they have to maintain their buildings. So do these projects, does a warm, safe, and dry project get prioritized over a new construction project with partnership funding, or is it, how do they look at that?
So there's actually kind of a two split. So priority, we're only allotted so much money from the legislative body annually. And I want to say it's around $70 million. And so the first priority is space for growth, and then building replacement, and then warm, safe, and dry. But we've been very fortunate in the past cycle that we've seen of the partnership. Everyone is getting funded, and it can be a couple of reasons: that there's not as many applications, or people who may have applied to build a $40 million high school can't pass a millage, the money gets turned back, and so those people who were approved but not funded get pushed up the line. That was the case as you and I were talking off screen about your school at Sheridan. People, you weren't funded initially, but things happened, and then they got you funded. And so warm, safe, and dry is kind of the third tier on funding, but we are seeing most everyone getting funded at some point. It may not be on that May 1st announcement, but as projects get turned back, then funding gets moved up.
Let me ask a question about, I know you mentioned a facilities wealth index, and I know that each school district has to document that. Is there because I've heard before a district being facility distress or being on a list.
Yeah.
So can you tell me what that means?
So facilities distress is just like the other distresses, whether they be fiscal or academic. Um, you There's several things that can trigger what they call first alert facilities distress. Um, what I have seen personally in my own experience has been if you have two failed millages, then that can trigger a first alert facilities distress, and you have to create a transition plan of what you're going to do. You have a certain time period. Um, I know districts have been placed on facilities distress, not a lot, but some have due to, neglect. There's districts out there, believe it or not, that really have never applied for partnership. So not completing your master plan, not utilizing the computerized maintenance program, not maintaining your facilities, all of those things can trigger facilities distress. And what happens is, let's say you're trying to build a new school, and the state has said, yes, we agree this building should be demolished and you need to replace this building. You have two failed millages, okay? So the state will come up and they will assess the district once again with a much closer eye, and they will say, these are the things that you must do in order to continue using this building. And you have a deadline of when you must complete those things. If you fail to meet that deadline, then the state can come in, they can take over the district, just like with everybody else. They can remove the board, they can remove the superintendent, and they can look and say, what are the things that must absolutely be done? We will do it, but in order to get our share back, whether, let's say it's a 60-40 split, in order to get our 40% back, we're going to pull money from anything that is not towards the curriculum. So that would be sports, extracurricular events, activities, and things like that.
Okay. Um, I know this happens a lot in roofing, and I
Mhm.
see this. And you'll have a roofer that gets out there and they'll go to a district and they'll say, "Let me just go look at your roofs and I'll tell you what you need." And then next thing you know, they say, "We need a roof and we're going to give you a price." And that district thinks, "Okay, that's great. Let's move on that." I know that with each, tell me the process, because I believe every school district, anytime you do a project, it should be
Mhm.
filed with the state. So there also, I know, is some procurement laws as to the size of that project and the value when you have to have an architect and engineer involved. So could you speak to that? Because I don't want any school district to get in trouble
Right.
for not using an architect and engineer and not registering your project
Oh
and running
yeah,
a state
because
facility.
there's still times today that I'll show up in a district and I'll be, where'd that barn come from? And so it's kind of like, and so it is, and that's kind of one of the things that even today, as facility consultants, our main goal is to keep our districts out of trouble, right? So we want to make sure that they are meeting all those gates. Um, the threshold for having an architect is around $150,000, $200,000. An engineer is $50,000 to $75,000. But that also depends on what you're doing. Now, if you're going from a flat roof, modified bitumen, okay, or a membrane, and you want to take that up to a metal standing seam roof, you're going to have architectural services, okay? If you're going shingle to shingle and you're replacing shingle roof, you probably won't need architectural services other than to help you design a specification for that roof. Now, it can get tricky because one of the things districts must do is everything that a district wants to do needs to be in their facility master plan if it's over $20,000. So that's the first thing, is you have to make sure that you've got that registered in there. If it's over $20,000, they have to submit a construction approval form. Well, it may be 50,000 now, but I always still use 20,000. You got to have a construction approval form filed with the state. You do have the opportunity to utilize TIPS TAPS for projects. The threshold in which you must bid out is $1 million. And so a lot of roofing companies are on TIPS TAPS, but I tell my districts, you may not get the best price when it's TIPS TAPS. TIPS TAPS is a convenience, whereas if you actually put it out for bid at $50,000, you must advertise and sealed bids. You may get a better price. I always err on the side of caution when it comes to roofing projects, and I still have my architects, even if they're going shingle to shingle, without doing any changes to the roof line, I still have them do a one-page drawing with specifications and turn that into the state. And it's also good then for the contractors to use. Um, so yeah, you get those companies that come out and tell you that, but that's when they need to pull back and say, okay, I need to get with my facilities consultant, or I need to get with our maintenance supervisor. I need to get with my architect, and I need to make sure that I've got all of my bases covered.
Aliza, real quick, talking about the facilities master plan brought up a question. When I used to work at BB School District, we worked with you, and I remember working on that facilities master plan. I think you told us it's kind of like a wish list, right?
It is.
You may not necessarily get to all of those projects, but they have to
Yeah,
be
the
on that
facility
list.
master plan, I always tell every district is we want to put everything in there that you want to do, right? It doesn't mean that you're going to do everything in there. So I always say anything you want to do, make sure it's in the plan. A wish list, yeah. Teachers may say, "Ooh, I want a margarita machine that's going to go off at 3:30 in the teacher's lounge." All right, I'll add that to the master plan. But we have to be sure that anything that we do is in the master plan. And things will come up throughout the year where they go, "Ooh, we've had a situation and we've got a grant and we want to build a barn." That's great. Even though it's not in the master plan when we submitted it in January or February, your person can go in at any time after and add it to the master plan and make sure it's still in compliance.
Okay. So let's talk tips taps for a second, because I know cooperative purchasing has become pretty prevalent on certain trades in the state, roofing being one.
Mhm.
And I know some roofers will use that to go out and sell that to a district where they would possibly be the only bidder. Now, with our district, even if we were going to do a cooperative purchasing agreement, we still take at least three bids that are maybe all three tips taps contractors, but we
Mhm.
still take competitive bids. So is it legal for a district to only take one bid from a tips taps contractor for
Yeah, because what those tips taps vendors have done is they've already gone through all the procurement process, and districts are allowed to use tips taps up to $1 million without having to go through the legalities of advertising and sealed bids. Okay, so if I have a roof project, which is not uncommon for a high school, that can go up to $1 million. So if it goes over that, let's say your tips vendor comes in and he says it's going to cost $1.2 million to do that. Immediately, it's kind of triggered. Now I've got to get bids, even with a tips taps vendor, because you've hit that threshold. But again, I always tell my districts, tips taps is really good if you're in a pinch, okay? Because you're not always going to get the best price as you would if you did go ahead and put it out for advertising and bid. So if you've had a storm come through and it's done damage to your roof and you've got to get that roof fixed this week, you can go to a tips taps roofing vendor immediately and go into contract with them until it hits that $1 million point. But if you're working on facility projects, I always tell my districts best practice is to advertise and bid and get three bids. So even what you guys are doing, it's a good practice, to just go ahead and get those, because you may not always get the best price with the first vendor you go to.
And I think typically tips taps is a good thing because you have vendors that have been pre-qualified, and
Exactly.
if you put it out, you may have 10 people come to bid, and really only 3 may have been qualified to actually do a project of that size. So you
Yeah.
keep your board out of trouble when a low bid comes in at maybe $300,000 lower than the qualified roofer, and if you accept that bid, obviously they had missed something. So
Right, and that's where, having someone like myself or your architect or your engineer, or some districts have construction managers that work alongside with them year round, really looking at that, because I'm like that. I'm like, okay, if I've got a vendor here that's telling me it's going to cost 1.2 million to do my high school, but I've got one that came in at 750,000, what's the delta? What did they miss? And of course, when I'm working with districts and we're writing up information to be put into the newspaper, the spec that's included within, or the area that's included within the specification that the vendors would require to get before putting their bid is performance bond, Arkansas contractor's license, workers' comp, all of the things that are required to work on public school buildings. Yeah.
okay.
I would also provide some clarification on the 1 million, because by statute it's the aggregate cost for a district, not necessarily for project. So that if a district has 3 smaller projects, if that third one would put them over $1 million, then they would have to bid out or go through a waiver process.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Lucas, for that clarity.
Okay. I know we're getting close to time. Just a quick, maybe a wrap up question. So, you talked about adequacy, equability, suitability. So, as a board member, how can a board member help their superintendent with facilities planning? Because us board members, not everybody's into facility. I mean, that's not our expertise. So,
Right, right. Well, one of the things that I would strongly encourage school boards and superintendents is to reach out to ASBA and get. ASBA now offers certified credited hours on facilities training, on master planning and partnership, and all of the rules and regs revolving around that. So that would be a good starting point, because then the board members understand the why we can't just run out and put up a barn, why we can't just go out and do this if we're paying for it on our own. So that would help. They will understand then that it kind of the old adage, it takes a village. It's all of the components of the wheel running properly. And that starts with having good and adequate facilities. So if a district wants to go spend $3 million to put in a new field house, but they've got 2 schools that have roofs that are collapsing and that are leaking and they need to get replaced, they'll understand, hey, we need to rethink our prerogatives and where the money needs to truly go. Do we really need a new field house, or can we take half of that money, apply for partnership, and work towards getting our facilities up to standard?
okay. I got one last question, and this is relevant based on the recent storms and the damage that, or any storm, but specifically the recent. As a facility consultant, do you help districts with assessing their storm damage, and how, once it becomes an insurance claim, how do you help a district manage through a storm damage claim?
Really, what I do is I just try to give information. And a good example is one of my districts recently had an extensive amount of storm damage, and so I was able to get engineers down there, structural engineers down there, to start assessing the damage and things like that. And then working on pulling data for the school, like what is your square footage? What's the age of your roofs? What was the condition of the roofs prior to the storm? And giving them that information and trying to help guide them in that process. So I'm not actually up on the roof, assessing, because I want to have an engineer. I want a structural engineer. If we've got structural damage, I want an engineer to look at the roof. Um, I will sometimes default to roofers that I've worked with in the past that are willing to come down and just look and give me an assessed. So then, because I know the insurance people will send their adjusters out, but I also want to be able to either refute their finding or substantiate their finding. And so I try to give my district as much information and as many points of contact that they can have.
Yeah. But just one last clarifying question, because I think this happens a lot. So, if that project, if it does become a re-roofing project or whatever, in a warm, safe, and dry situation due to a storm damage,
Mhm.
the project still has to go through the same process with facilities,
Absolutely.
has to be a form filed, has to be an
Absolutely.
architect involved, all of those things. And
All of those things. Right.
I think that happens a lot during a storm situation where they're like, "Oh, we can just have someone come out and get started on this project because um,
Right.
it was
Because
emergency."
typically what I've seen with the insurance programs is they'll say, yes, we agree you have severe roof damage. We're going to honor this claim. Get 3 bids. Okay. So they'll go out and get 3 bids and they think that they're ready to go. But once I get that, yes, we understand and we accept this claim, I'm immediately going to call my architect and say, I need you to give me a specification drawing and a plan to submit to the state, whether that's, because sometimes you get in there and it may be a little bit snakier than what the adjuster even thinks if they have to do a tear off or anything like that. So, but yes, construction approval form, it's got to get added to the master plan. And that's about it. The only variance is, the insurance provider's making the payment and not the state.
Yeah. And when the state reviews a project, there is a state facilities manual that outlines what type of roofs they'll accept. So
Exactly.
that's just something for all schools to know, that there is a manual that says you can't just go out and put
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
a roof on.
There was a one-page document that schools are used to follow. And they follow the Arkansas Building Authority, the ABA, the building code, and they followed fire code. We now have a 700-page construction manual that has to be followed. And, that means if you've got a bona fide flat roof, you can't go back to a flat roof. You have to bring that up to a regulation pitch, whether it's a quarter pitch or what, or if you're going to metal, you've got to have certain regulations in place. So yeah, you can't just go back with what you have or what you want. You've got to follow the standard.
Okay,
And the rule of thumb is if the building code is higher than the standard, you follow the building code. If the standard, the facility manual standard, is higher than the code, you follow the standard.
great. Well, thank you so much for your time and all the information you've provided. Where can districts find your contact information, and then your colleagues that would service other districts? Are all the facility consultants? Is there a list of contact information somewhere they can access?
I don't know if we're listed anywhere. My contact information can be gathered through ASBA, and I will provide my email and phone number for everyone. We Most of the facility consultants in the state work together, going all the way back to the legislative statewide assessment. So we're real good about not stepping on each other's toes, but supporting each other. So if a district reaches out to me and they already have a consultant, I will defer them to their consultant. But
Okay. Thank you. I'll make sure that we post that on the ASBA website of
yeah,
all the facility consultants,
yeah.
because y'all are such a valuable resource to all the districts, and I would caution any district to do something without the help of their
Without someone, exactly. And again, the big thing I think we're going into elections in March, new school board members coming on, new superintendents around the state. I think the school board training through ASBA for facilities, master planning, partnership, and rules is a huge asset to board members to understand all of the ins and out of their facilities.
Okay.
That wraps up this episode of ASBA BoardCast. Facilities planning can feel overwhelming, but understanding the fundamentals makes all the difference. A special thank you to Aliza Jones and Jeff Lisenbey for sharing their expertise with us today. Aliza serves as an ASBA consultant and is available to work directly with districts that want to go deeper into facilities planning. She can provide up to 3 hours of facilities training tailored to your board and leadership team. If you would like to connect with Aliza, you can reach her at aliza.jones@lavaccaschools.com or at alizaj2000@yahoo.com. Her phone number is 479-264-2484. You can also contact ASBA if you'd like assistance scheduling facilities training for your district. We also want to hear from you. What topics would you like us to cover on future episodes? If there's a question your board has wrestled with or a topic you'd like us to break down, let us know. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.